This episode is brought to you by
Co-creation.
Welcome to Leadership Actually. It's not love, it's leadership. Welcome, Lisa Powney.
Welcome, Lee Rogers. How the devil are you?
Good.
I'm glad that we match.
I know.
Your glasses match my outfit. Where's your outfit?
This was close to the original one we did that we said we'd wear a uniform.
Oh, we did.
I think this is that same jacket. It's not the same top, but
Then that went out the window.
I know, yeah. It didn't work, that did it?
So what's going on for you?
There's lots. I am in final preparation of Land's End John O'Groats, the cycling. I know I'm going to keep mentioning it, but it's for an amazing charity called Active Hope. My brother-in-law is going to do the whole lot with me.
Wow.
The messiness is, currently we don't have a driver. We don't know where we're staying particularly, so the logistics are to be confirmed, and it starts relatively soon, so it'll work out. I'm a bit of a... It'll work out. There's two blokes. It's going to be okay. There's a few people behind the scenes going, get your stuff sorted out to get it all, crossed and dotted, but it'll be fine.
It'll be fine. You're doing well. You're looking well on it and doing well.
Yeah, I'm focusing on the cycling and the hills. Oh,
What have you learnt in your training? That's a good thing. Did you learn from Ed Clancy?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. So I've changed my seat and height. I wear the lycra. He said you wear the lycra, so honestly, I get lots of good looks. Lots of good looks about the lycra. My daughter and wife give me very weird looks when I'm going from the bedroom downstairs to train sometimes, every night. But I'm in the lycra.
In the lycra. He told you to get in the lycra.
He told me to get in the lycra.
It makes a difference, loads of difference. So.
Yeah, but you know what? It's remembering to have fun.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's hard and whatever. And actually, we've got one of the kids that work with Active Hope to design the top. And that's what the top says. It says, have fun. Yeah. And I was like, I think taking the mic, because it's going to be 600 miles in, absolutely blown the gasket. Look down and go, have fun. This is not fun, but you got to remember, that's what it's there for.
Absolutely. Well done.
Well, I've not done it yet.
But you're doing it.
So, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Life is good. Fredster is all good. He's still being the greatest showman, so he's on to it. He's going to definitely be that. I live vicariously through him, so that's all good. And new fad alert, so I am still doing choir. I've given up Tai Chi, but I am going to join a netball club. Not that I'm any good at team sport. When I was at school, I broke my nose playing netball, but I saw it, and it was over 40s. And I thought, I'll give that a go. Just because you can. So that's going to be, I'm going to start on Sunday. It's my new fad.
How many fads are you going to have in a year?
Because I've always been trying to find the thing. So
okay.
Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Over 40s netball.
Nice, love that.
Yeah, so that's my next one. So I'll give you an update next time.
I love it.
Whether I carried it on or not.
Yeah, and Ella's still in the studio today, and she's doing similar musical theatre. I think it's Matilda is the latest one. So
amazing.
But how much joy do you get, though? Like you say, living vicariously through Freddie. How much joy does it give you watching them do it?
I know, I love it. He's Annie. That's his latest one. I love it. They're doing their shows and sing along. That's why I joined the choir, though. I'm in competition.
In competition. Yeah, no, it is. It's wonderful.
It is.
Absolutely wonderful.
But let's do our messy question. I'm going to ask you the messy question this time.
Okay, let's go for it.
So, Lee, when was the last time your experience or values pushed you to speak up or act on something, even when you knew it might be uncomfortable or come with some risk? Oh, that's a big one, isn't it?
It is, and I think the most recent one has been about White Ribbon campaign, actually, and advocating against violence against women and girls. And when I look back to my family history, how I've grown up, my experiences, to this point, I've never really talked about it. I've never really spoken about it publicly. And actually, to denounce that those things are wrong is absolutely the right thing to do. It is part of who I am, DNA, to empower girls and women, not just about it not being safe and violence against women and girls, but actually fundamentally going, we need a system shake-up, because in 2026 there's not as many female leaders in boardrooms.
No.
It is getting better. There's not as many black female leaders in boardrooms. It's getting better, but it's not anywhere near fast enough. And when people say to me about, it's about capability, and you've got to have the right people in the right roles, I fundamentally agree with that. But it's like, how is the system designed to then make what classifies what's capable, or what gets them to that point? And that's a system thinking I think we really need to challenge in a workplace context. But I help support not just female leaders, but female leaders as well in coaching spaces going, and whatever, I want people to get the best out of people and unlock performance. So for me, it is thinking really deeply about what can I do and advocate for women. And not just talking about like where it's difficult for boys, and I know that's part of the solution, but what are the opportunities that we need to create? What is the new pathways? We've had brilliant guests on the show that, irrespective of age, we've had some amazing female leaders.
Yeah,
our audience is typically a female audience, and they're doing amazing things. But what needs to change in 2026? That's what I'm conscious about.
Good on you. Love that. Absolutely. And we asked that question because it does have some relevance to our guest. So I'm going to introduce our guest. Hi, Rob.
Good morning.
Good morning. Our guest is Rob Regan. We knew each other a good few years ago now. We just reminisced in that space, and you are known for speaking up. So we'll do a bit more of that.
To my detriment on occasion. Yeah.
How are you?
I'm really well. Yeah, as I'm feeling really good about life at the moment. I finally gave up full-time work in December, and unsurprisingly, life gets materially better when you're not doing 60, 70 hours a week on things that you're not particularly passionate about. So yeah, I'm doing really good.
Absolutely thriving on it. So I'm going to give you your formal introduction, and then
Okay.
we'll have the pub introduction maybe after that, if that's all right. So Rob Regan, for us who don't know that, is a former CEO of Royal London Investment Platform. I think that's where we met in those days, and also a former Chief Operating Officer at Principality Building Society. You've got a career that spans senior leadership, transformation, and operating at the heart of complex, high accountability organisations. But what makes your story particularly compelling isn't just the roles you've held, it's the journey behind them. Alongside a successful career, you've been on a path of self-development and growth, taking the time to reflect, challenge yourself, and evolve how you lead and show up. More recently, you've stepped into a public conversation, we'll call it that, around the future of Welsh Rugby Union, calling for greater transparency, accountability, and a better way forward at a time when leadership is under intense scrutiny. This conversation will be more than just about your career success, and it's been really successful, or organisational change. It's about the journey that you've been on and shaped you as a leader, and what happens when experience, values, and voice come together in a moment that matters.
Sounds really impressive. I can't wait to meet that person.
Where's the mirror? Let's get a mirror.
Yeah, it's really kind. Yeah. It's funny. You know me pretty well, right? I find that deeply uncomfortable. I always have, because lots of the things people say and write, I don't. It's one of the parts of your self-development, isn't it? It's hard to recognise some of those things in yourself. So thank you. It's very kind of you to say such nice things.
You're very welcome, and all meant. So outside that though, outside some of that leadership stuff, if we were down the pub with you, I'll ask you that, and said, who is Rob Regan? What would you say?
The bit you missed, I'm also an electrician, so that's quite important to me.
Yeah, it is very important.
But yeah, I suppose if I answer that question, if you were down the pub today, what would people, who would I be? I think people, they might use slightly less polite words, but it'd definitely be a man on a mission, or a man with a mission, depending on what you say. But I'm someone that's got a lot of time on their hands, full of passion, and finally doing something that I really, really believe in after, not feeling that for a long time. So I'm feeling really motivated. How do you succinctly say that? Yeah, someone that's enjoying life and trying to make a difference, I guess.
Nice. Love that, man on a mission.
Man on a mission.
But we like to start with the messy moments because you said you're in your best place. So we're going to take you back to maybe not so. So your messy moments. So Rob, across your career and recent experiences, can you share a moment when things didn't feel clear or comfortable, or where you were stretched, challenged, or had to make a call that didn't feel easy at the time?
Yeah, how do you do 20 years of messiness in seconds? I think for me, my entire career, and it took me until the last few years of working with my coach Angela to kind of work some of this stuff out. But there's been lots and lots of messy moments. There's what I've learned is whenever my values I've felt a conflict with my personal values, it was less about pressure. It was more about when there was a build-up of a feeling where what I was doing was conflicting directly with my personal values. And if I look right back to my early days, I was working for a company, I was only 18 or 19, and I had a fallout with the boss and picked my toolbox up out of the back of the company car and walked off and never went back. So I've had this history of when it gets to a point, there's kind of it's not one moment, it's something that just kind of creeps up and then I've had enough. So that's I could repeat that story through most of my career where I've got to that point. But I suppose one where a lot of I find I've always tried to convince myself that work and life, home and work were very separate. People talk about balance. I've always believed that I kept work and home very separate, but the reality is you absolutely don't. So there was a point it was kind of 18, 19, 20, but it crystallised around COVID really. So my wife Nicola had been diagnosed with cancer in May 18, April 18. So we'd had a really difficult period through, those early days. Amy was only 8 at the time, and you're kind of, I'd worked, as you know, because we knew each other then, I'd worked away from home for give or take 20 years. And that starts to change some of your thinking. I'd had a few other tragedies. My brother had died really young, my sister had died really young. And it was that moment where you're like, I'm a dad of an 8-year-old, and things could change quite rapidly. And that was probably the start of it, but it built then. So I took some time off when Nicola was poorly, and thankfully she's great now, she's doing really well. And I effectively then came back close to home. I took the role in Bath. I was doing the role in Bath at the time, and we were just going through a process where lots of change at London, and the business I was CEO of then, and I'd only just taken the CEO job when that happened. It wasn't a particularly successful business. It was 8 years into a 2-year change program, and 100 million plus into a 20 million budget. So it was under pressure, and we were trying to rescue the business, get the change finished. My team were amazing at the time. We managed to get the change live, and the brokers who supported that business had been promised a Ferrari for 10 years, and we rocked up with a Skoda. So that was a tough bit. So the period of strain went through change in work, stuff at home. And then there was a significant change of leadership there, and at Royal London I was on the group exec, and the group CEO moved on, group chair moved on, so there was lots of change, and we concluded pretty quickly that the business I was CEO of wasn't going to be part of the future for Royal London, and despite having spent all those years trying to get it live and get the business up and running, we decided to sell a business. So we went into fantastic support from people within Royal London. We go to market with the business, we start selling, get into a process late 19 to sell the business. All Q1 2020, the business is starting to recover, it's stable. I probably was in London every day of the week meeting suitors for the business, and then obviously March the 20th, 2020, we go into lockdown. And I'd never really worked in Cardiff or worked from home, and all of a sudden I'm in a house where we only had broadly dial-up internet. If any of the ladies down the lane did their online shop, my internet would drop off. It was that bad, and we ended up selling this business. online, and bearing in mind that that had never been done before.
Wow.
So I'm in London trying to sell a business with support from the group. My team were trying to deal with COVID, keep the business running, keep the team motivated, and we ended up going through. I found COVID really tough, really tough. I'd never been in the house before, never been like locked up like so many of us were, and we managed to get the business away. But to bring all that together, there was an extended period of really significant and sustained work pressure, really significant and sustained home pressure, culminating in the sale of a business to it was actually to a big corporate, which I felt I was done with. I didn't ever want to go back into kind of big corporate, certainly at that point in my life. And I had that, right, I've done this for all these years. The business that I'd bought, the business that I was running, wasn't a business I wanted to work for. It had all sorts of cultural issues in the papers at the time, and I just kind of decided enough was enough and kind of walked away. So the reason it's important is just so people recognise that it's rare. If work's good and home's bad, you can generally deal with that. If home's not great, you can throw yourself into work, which is what I've always done. I've always hidden in work, if you like, when home's been tough. So yeah, that was probably the messiest of messy moments throughout the period, which resulted in me kind of stepping away from the CEO job and taking about 12, 14 months off.
Wow. And what lessons did you learn from that?
I think there were so many. Probably the main one is, when that feeling of this no longer fits with my personal values, or you're in an environment where you don't particularly feel valued, it gets hard to put the 60, 70 hours in. You do it because that's what you do. I did the same working for myself, so people will laugh. Whatever job you're doing, you'll do the same hours.
Yeah.
But I think it was recognising that despite all of that, despite putting all your energy, effort, every bit of your fibre into trying to transform and change your business, you were just back to being a number again. And it feels like you're being taken advantage of. Not that you are, because you're getting paid very handsomely, you're always well paid and looked after. But it's that feeling that there's no personal connection with what you're trying to turn around.
And just listening to your story there, and thanks for sharing so openly. Going back to your wife's diagnosis, and as a dad of an 8-year-old, just take, how did that feel in that moment, and what did it take to really be present and shaky?
Yeah, it was terrifying, right? So your daughter sat in the studio, so obviously you'll empathise with that situation, and it was particularly hard because the role, my wife and I had these conversations reasonably early on, which was if we were going to have children, and we went through IVF to have Amy as well, so that there's another bit of the story. The long story is my wife and I were childhood sweethearts at 15. We got to our early 20s, went off and married other people, and got back together when we were 30. So there's a whole backstory. We ended up, Amy came along, she was a blessing, and it was really special. And then I'd pretty much from that moment on been an absent parent because I worked away. People used to say to me, how did you sleep when Amy was a baby? It was great. I was in amazing hotels all week, and Nicola was left dealing with all of that. So there was that moment of, well, I don't even know how to be a good dad. What if something happened? How do you deal? Almost like I had to learn to get to, I know it sounds ridiculous, but you have to get to know your daughter. I was a weekend dad, and I was a bad one because I'd come home after being away all week. I'd try and do take her to my mum's, take her to see my mum and dad, and I'd go to the park, right? Play rugby, go to the pub. You try and fit your life into a weekend when you're working away all week. So it was terrifying. I had this prospect, and thankfully it never went that way, of being a single parent, because that's where your mind goes straight away. You worry, you think the worst, particularly given my history with my brother and my sister. And then it settling the COVID. Beyond that, then, because it kind of all blurs, the 18 to 20, it's a bit of a blur. To where I've been away all my life. Nicola had built a life with Amy that was very independent, and then all of a sudden we're all stuck in the house together. So it was tough. It was tough. It was tough because I didn't feel I was equipped to be a good dad, because I hadn't been a good dad before. It was tough because I wasn't used to being constrained and confined to, 4 walls when I'd had so much freedom and independence in terms of, even though it's not glamorous, people think it is, but, I could work as late as I liked, I could get up as early as I liked, I could, go out for dinner, I could have a beer. All of a sudden, you're trying to live this life now in quite a constrained space. So yeah, I really wobbled through that period. I didn't know, who I was or what I was doing. So it was probably the moment that led to needing some proper help, I think.
Yeah.
And would people on the out, so would work colleagues have known kind of that struggle, and I mean more intimately, actually. I mean more as you going, actually I'm not the dad maybe I wanted to be, and there's been some sacrifice to what you've chose to do, right?
Yeah, I think one or two. I'm you go where you see, right? I'm pretty open book. I wear my heart on my sleeve to my detriment again on occasion, but no way would people have understood just how low I was, because that's not who Rob was. The bravado, I'm invincible, I can do anything, or I can do everything, actually, which is worse. Most people wouldn't have known, because when you're in work, you put your game face on. You've got a lot of people depending on you. There was 300 or 400 people in Bath at the time that were dependent on me making the right decision for the sale of the business, trying to make sure they were looked after, 400 families. So you don't take it to work. I did take some time off while Nicola was going through her early stages of her treatment, but I actually resigned because I didn't feel I could be the CEO and be the dad. And it was only a chap called Tim Harris, who was the CFO of Royal London Group at the time, kind of reached out to me, and he probably saved me at that point, because I wasn't really in a position to not be working, going through all of that. And he was like, what are you doing? This organisation's big enough to take care of you. You've been... And he was probably one that understood, what I needed at the time. But I definitely wasn't open about how that felt, because at that point in your life, you don't, because that kind of... we talk about vulnerability now. That's an absolute weakness, particularly for a allegedly, hugely self-confident, to the point of arrogant, male CEO leader. It just wouldn't have washed with most people. So yeah, it was probably very few. And then equally outside of work, the chap that plays rugby, not very well, but they were my two states of being, work or rugby, and family third almost at that point. That's definitely what Nicola would say. And you don't talk about those, certainly in those days. You've been much better now. You didn't talk about those types of things at the rugby club either. So it was quite a long, dark, lonely period of my own doing. But yeah, I don't think most people would have known.
And final question on this little bit for me. How's it changed you as a dad?
You'd have to ask Amy. She'd probably say not at all. That's a great question. I definitely think I was more selfish. Definitely more selfish before. Not because I talked about this a lot with Angela, my coach. Working really hard, I didn't see as selfish, because actually it allowed us to make different choices, and being away from home, I didn't think of at the time as particularly selfish. But when you look back, actually, I was thriving on the pace, the promotions, I was in positions I never dreamed of. I got promoted very quickly, so I was, getting paid pretty well, and I was living a life that I never imagined, and it was probably a bit of that became a bit like a drug. The ego needed stroking, because I definitely still have the electrician's chip on my shoulder, as Steve Hughes would say. So it changed me, because I'd like to think I'm a bit less selfish. We still get it wrong occasionally. I'd like to think that I have a better relationship with Amy, probably because of some of that, than I might have if I didn't, because I probably would have just carried on, is the truth. So even though none of us are ever perfect, I'd like to think I'm more able to have a conversation with her about things that are difficult now than I might have been then. Certainly post my time with Angela.
And I see that a lot, Rob, actually, in coaching, particularly males, in senior roles, and I might be the first person they've ever talked to about, and actually see that, the working hard and those hours, the provider kind of mentality was just trying to do the best for the family, you know, and there were some other sides, and then something happens and they go, I wasn't expecting that, you know, wife says, or something happens, and, you know, the children, and they thought I was just doing the right thing or the best thing, but actually crumbling as well at the same time, probably at burnout.
Yeah, so I probably had 80, I was lucky, my relationship with Angela as a coach, Angela knows more about me than probably anybody on the planet now, and if ever she listens to this, she'll probably be laughing. But, she asked me to write, we did some stuff where you go right back to your childhood, as you know, all that works, and she asked me to write a list of all the things that you could the things in your memory that were most impactful, going right back to your first memories. And the first thing was, in all the years of coaching that she's done it, I was the first person to ever submit that on an Excel spreadsheet. It won't surprise Lisa, but she found that
ranking
quite funny.
order.
Yeah, but we had one of our first sessions when we ran through it. I was down in, she's got a beautiful little studio down in Chichester, and I used to like to drive down because that would prepare you for coaching. And half an hour into going through the list, she was in tears, I was in tears, you know, because it's probably the first time I'd faced into that stuff, you know, and I probably, in the last 2-3 years, I probably never looked back. I've never looked at it again.
Yeah.
But just going through that stuff, if you go through from early childhood right the way through to the, you know, the Nicola stuff and Amy stuff in 2018, when you look at it, you're like, you don't even realise, because you hide it all away. So it was great for me, and it definitely helped me get more able to face into and deal with some of the stuff I'd probably been burying for years. Yeah,
it's understanding, isn't it? Once we're aware about why we might behave in a certain way, it opens our eyes.
Absolutely.
And so I'm not going to let go about the electrician. I'm going to go back. Let's go back. So how did our Cardiff boy, who started out as an electrician, I don't even know how he got into that actually, become a CEO and COO? How did that happen?
So I'll show you afterward. Then I've started writing a book, believe it or not.
I love that.
And it's called Building Sites and Boardrooms. And I've only done 2 or 3 chapters. I you know, again, could I ever imagine being someone to talk about writing a book? No, but I did a leadership chat in Birmingham actually at the National Coaching Awards, and it resonated, and I had a brilliant response. So I've started writing it down. But the short version is, both my parents were, my dad was a lorry driver, my mum was like a post lady, but my mum did anything, worked in Greggs, post lady, school cleaner, receptionist. Yeah. So none of my family went to uni, not even my extended family, none of us had come from professional backgrounds. So my mum at the time worked as an electricity board receptionist. So my work experiences with electricians, and that was my first ever real exposure to people that were skilled.
Yeah. So
it just led to an apprenticeship, led to being an electrician, and I was good with that. And then Nicola and I met when I was really young, and she was much more academic, much more capable, much more driven. She went to college, uni, much brighter than me. And it was like that moment where she actually applied for a job for me. I didn't even know in a Sony in Bridgend, and I ended up going for the interview, getting the job. So I went from electrician, building sites, engineer, very quickly then went from engineering as in mechanical, electrical, to product, to continuous improvement. So that, for me, the big, you could almost map your career out in like chunks. There was the building site bit, there was the engineering bit, then continuous improvement became like almost the catalyst for everything else that happened, because it was the first time I wasn't particularly academic, I didn't do well in school, and I got continuous improvement. And once you've got it, once you've, working for the Japanese, they talk about the Muda goggles, the waste, seeing the waste. Once you've got that, you can't unsee bad stuff. So that then became continuous improvement, which transitioned from manufacturing into FS, and then the rest, I guess, is history.
Wow. So then we're back to when you're in Lloyd. So what happened after that really messy period, and what did you do next?
So that was Royal London.
Royal London, sorry.
Yeah. So basically, I gave up work at 45, thinking I was done. I bought some houses. I bought a van, and I went back to being a builder.
Oh.
So I had about 14 months of I took these houses right back to brick. rewired, replumbed, replastered, new kitchens. You know, basically done them up, built a little rental portfolio, and realised that, you know what, whilst I'm enjoying this, and I do really enjoy that kind of practical side of life, it didn't quite have it wasn't really floating my boat. It was one of the things I'm disappointed about, how much I really missed the cut and thrust of, at that point certainly, I wasn't ready to not be that anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, I ended up, Julianne from Principality I was Hodge first actually, I did a very short stint at the Hodge, and then I ended up in Principality, so I did another 4 or 5 years, but now I'm definitely done.
Definitely.
For now.
For now.
I know, yeah, there was definitely that lingo, wasn't there?
Now,
There was not that conviction in that I'm definitely done.
Yeah, no, I think I'm definitely done.
I think I'm definitely done. As a coach, there's something in that.
Okay, right. No, I certainly don't want to work full time anymore.
No.
I'm really, really settled into not having to, you know, be tied to a role and to a business. I'm really enjoying the freedom. And I didn't the first time. That's the difference. The first time I felt like I was still missing something. This time I do feel like I'm done.
When you've got a passion.
Yeah.
So how was throughout all of that career and that journey, how's your perspective of leadership and personal growth shifted over that time?
It's really fascinating. So you don't even really recognise anything in the early stages, but I became more curious. You know, is it nature, is it nurture, and I started learning more because I'd never, you know, because I was more engineering biased. The people side of change or leadership, I'd never really put a lot of thought into, and I just assumed that I'd done okay because I got on with people, and there is a little bit of that. But actually, my learning style was watching others. So I'd kind of, without realising, I'd taken quite a situational leadership type approach. So I'd looked at the very best. You know, there's some people I worked for, Andy Briggs for a short period. Funny story about that later, maybe. Alistair Lemon, you know, some people. There was Rosie Harris for a short time in Lloyd's, and then you know you get people like Barry O'Dwyer come into Royal London. I'd been around some incredible leaders for a long time, and I was trying to work out what made them successful. Mm-hmm. And what I realised was probably that there were bits of my leadership, and that's what really led me to work with Angela off the back of some of the stuff we've talked about already, was I was replicating behaviours I really didn't like. Because I'd become conditioned in my head. I think it might sound like an excuse, but I'd become conditioned to what drives success. Well, that particular behaviour drives success. So if I want to be successful, I need to be like that. And that the final, you know, what pushed me to the coaching was I really didn't like bits of the way I'd led. I look back with regret about some of the people I'd damaged, definitely along the way, and tried, I guess, to put some of that right then in the last 4, 5, 6 years. But it was recognising that what traditional leadership looked like wasn't actually particularly kind, it wasn't actually particularly effective. You probably left more bad than good behind you. Yeah, you could count the results, but it's the trail of destruction you leave behind you. So, you know, I'm disappointed that I learned that later than I wish I had. But there, you know, I'm probably focusing on the negative. There are lots of good bits as well. I literally had a message this week off the back of some of the rugby work, someone I haven't worked with for 12 years actually, early Lloyd's days, who'd written to me and said, you know, you were always someone that walked the talk, and, you know, loved working for you, and I've never been able to replicate that experience for the next 10 years of my career. Has been a bit of a letdown. Yeah. So for every one of those, that makes, you know, it gives you some confidence you didn't get it wrong all of the time. But I think it was recognising the impact you have on people's lives, recognising how, you know, you can either make or break someone's career. And I know that sounds a bit odd, but it's true, you know. And like I said, it took me probably until I was mature enough to face into my own issues to realise the damage my issues were doing to others. So yeah, it's a bit waffly, but hopefully that.
No, and it's not, Robert. I think it gives a true sense of it, and actually what I'm reflecting on there is the courage it takes to not only reflect on that, but to say that publicly, to recognise it, but do something about it. Because it springs to my mind that, and I've seen lots of leaders and worked with lots of leaders that have followed your suit. What makes something successful in the here and now? And it doesn't matter how we get there. I've seen so many people do that, and there's a lot. The world we live in, there's a lack of investment in terms of leaders and leadership capabilities. It seems as that's what the data is suggesting. It's giving people time to reflect on that and working out what.
It's really interesting, the courage point, because you don't think of it as that at the time. But I had coaches. I was really fortunate. So as soon as I started getting recognition for being someone with potential, as companies like Lloyd's, Halifax, Bank of Scotland, they did that really well. It was a bit of a conveyor belt, but once you were in the talent pool, you had a lot of support. But I probably didn't take advantage in a good way, as in I never benefited from all that support because I was too. What can you unless you've done my job, how can you tell me? Because I didn't appreciate the leadership and the psychology of leadership at that point. So I probably didn't have the courage to face into what I needed to in those early days because I was too busy still trying to prove myself. It was only at that point where you realise, some of these other things in life happen, and you realise. So people use the word courage, but it's having firstly the mirror you mentioned just now. Firstly someone has to really hold the mirror up to you. You then have to hold it up to yourself, and then you've got to be prepared to act. Because I probably knew for 3 years before I did it that I needed the help, but never had the courage to go there.
You can have the mirror though, but you've got to be able to look in it, haven't you?
That's right. Yeah, that's the point. Yeah, and that's where Angela was brilliant. She was brutal. She was really brutal. There was no fluffy coaching from Ange. She was absolutely brutal. So she didn't let me put the mirror down for some time, which was brilliant. And I'll value the time I spent with her forever because it definitely changed my outlook on lots of things.
And it is really important that you say that out loud. Like two things that come out, the fact about the responsibility about being a leader. We always remember the best or the worst, and they can break us or make us, and often our direction in our career has been about leaders. They are our next parents that influence it. And when we take on that role, we don't often understand that responsibility. So it's great that, you can see that. And the second is a coach. There's still a lot of resistance around coaching in the business arena. It's either I don't need it because you don't know my job, or you're telling me because I must be rubbish at it. Whereas in the world of sport, and we'll come on to that, and in those, it's a very different way of thinking, isn't it?
I stood up in a national coaching conference I think my opening line was, when Angela invited me to this, I couldn't think of anything worse than being stuck in a room full of 200 airy-fairy coaches. that
was a good opener.
That was my good opening. Again, I left that session, and I said, this is only last year, I left that session feeling more positive and more motivated about life than I had, because the energy, there was a load of speakers there, but the point is that one of the things I took away, your vibe is your tribe, right? And if you surround yourself by people that are more positively biased and acting in a certain way, and that's only last year you're learning that. So you just that getting positive feedback from people you don't know about things you're doing, even though you don't think you think, oh, that's ego. Maybe there's a little bit of that, but actually it's just nice. How often in life, through your career, particularly for blokes, I think, in or out of work, the rugby club's not no place for the shrinking violet, right? Because you don't get compliments from anybody in the rugby club, and you certainly don't get it when you're someone senior in work, because most of the people below you don't like you whether you're good or bad because you're senior, and most of the people above you just think you need to do more. So getting some positive affirmation and recognition. It's good for everyone, but I've been rubbish at that my whole life. I was so relentlessly dissatisfied with the status quo and everything I did. Working for me was an absolute nightmare, because instead of a thank you, you'd have, but we should have done it last week. Yeah. So that's the bit you wish you'd recognised earlier. Right, sorry, I wish I'd recognised.
Absolutely, but you have.
I have.
So
now I finally finished work and stopped damaging people.
But you've got a new mission, a new leadership mission. Tell us about that, and how the devil have you got into that?
I was asked that question a number of times recently. So look, right, I've played rugby for 30 years, and I was useless. I managed to play rugby for 30 years without being able to catch, pass, or run. But what I would say about rugby is it's massively enriched my life. So even though I had these odd, kind of weird, different lives, one with quite a senior role in the city, one, you know, the drunken fool on in the rugby club. Rugby doesn't really do class, particularly in Wales. So whether I'm sat in a boardroom in London, there's always someone that's been on a Lions tour or been to a World Cup, and rugby becomes a common language. And what I loved about rugby is that, you know, and it's not the case in every rugby society, but certainly in Wales, it doesn't matter whether you're the milkman or the CEO. Once you're on the rugby pitch, and you know you've got the vas on and taped your head up, you're just another bloke that someone's trying to smash the, you know, crap out of. So I feel my life has been massively enriched through rugby. I've got lifetime friends through rugby. I've travelled the world through rugby, and I got to the point, I'd obviously worked for the sponsor of the Welsh Rugby Union for a number of years, and whilst I recognised there was a decline going on in Welsh rugby, you know, quite an understandable decline for a number of reasons, I felt that I couldn't really do anything about it because it wouldn't have been appropriate whilst I was working for a sponsor. So I decided that, in February, enough was enough, and I needed to step up.
Wow. So what did you do?
I didn't really think too much about it at the time. I didn't really have a plan, but I started, you know, trying to write reasonably thoughtful posts. I'm not on social media apart from LinkedIn, and as I said at the outset, I just was trying to. I knew there would be other people that felt the same, and I started posting about some of the challenges. It was a little bit, you know, challenging of the senior folk of the union and the leadership culture, and I started talking about that. And very, very quickly, I called it the Coalition of the Willing. It just took off, and all of a sudden, people, you know, from all across Wales, all across the UK, some from, you know, as far and wide as the States, and others, how can we help? How can we help? You know, and suddenly something that started off as a, you know, I've had enough and I want to help, turned into something quite powerful and quite important. And we've probably now got somewhere in the order of, I don't know, up to 200 people in one way or another who want to either help or support, or are just sending messages or reviewing docs and information. And yeah, I started trying to build some presence and credibility and reaching out to people that were all involved right across the game, with the view that I just can't stand and watch this happen. And yeah, people were super generous with their time. That's what I've loved so much, is I've met probably 60, 70 people face to face over the last 10 weeks. I've travelled to parts of Wales I've never been to before. I'm meeting people, trying to learn as much as I can really quickly to try and use what, you know, because I have worked in senior roles in Wales recently, that probably gave me a bit of credibility and a bit of a platform and a voice. So it was that combination of passion, skills, voice. And we're all of a sudden I found myself in talking to different people about rugby that I never imagined I'd ever meet, and hopefully starting to have some positive influence and impact.
And what is the mission or the impact that you're looking for?
Yeah, so in Wales at the moment there are four regions. The proposal from the Welsh Rugby Union leadership team is to reduce that to 3 to save cost. My view is, yeah, from a cost perspective that makes a lot of sense, but I worry about the untold damage that it'll do to rugby for the long term. It feels very short-termism. You know, if you think about it in our other worlds, you don't cut your core product. You know, you look at other ways. So I'm you know, working with a group of people to try and bring more money into the game, to try and make sure that community rugby in particular can be funded more sustainably, and then make the case for some leadership change at the Welsh Rugby Union.
Absolutely.
And there's clearly lots of thought gone into that, Rob. How is it important that leadership teams particularly go about that and the culture that they create whilst doing change?
So for me, that's probably one of the things I've learned a bit later than I wished I had. Culture is everything, right? So for me, there's still a need to have that conversation at the Welsh Rugby Union. So what there was a lot of focus on culture off the back of the Dame Rafferty review, which there was a lot of misogyny, there was a lot of negative stuff going on, which led to a change a few years ago. But the lack of transparency is still a real issue, and the unwillingness to listen to the outside world is still a real issue. So for any business to be successful, and for you talked about courage earlier, we discussed courage. At the moment, I think it's going to take some significant courage in the Welsh Rugby Union to recognise that the culture is not clear, it's not fit for purpose in my view, and decisions are being made for the wrong reasons. So every leadership group needs to go through that, looking in the mirror and ask themselves, faced with such challenge from such a broad group of stakeholders, how are they going to reconcile the discord and discomfort from all their external stakeholders with, we're not changing our plan. And you could apply that to any business. You think about, let's go back to Blockbusters. Blockbusters were offered to get bought out by Netflix and refused, and look what happened to them, right? They weren't prepared to change. They weren't prepared to change their mind. So yeah, that's my learning, is culture is everything. There needs to be a leadership conversation around the types of leaders they need in the union, and they need to face into the external, not just from me, but from all of the different groups that are challenged in them, and ask themselves, do we have the courage to change our minds?
Absolutely, and that's such a big mission, very different in the world of change. It's not as easy to plot what might you need to do to make that shift. It's kind of turning that ship around. So very excited to see what you do in that space, and we could touch it all day. And I think that'll be another podcast.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, a couple of months' time, see how that's going.
It's been quite dark. I feel like I was having a coaching session live on camera.
Lovely. That's all very human and messy. See, definitely. But thank you so much for
Thanks
sharing
for having
your
me
story.
on.
We've really enjoyed that, and good luck with that mission.
Thank
we can't
you.
wait to hear more.
Final question for me. Who should we have in the hot seat where you are now?
The hot seat. That's a tricky one to answer. So, leaders that have really inspired me, these are not people I know personally, but there's a lady who actually was involved with the Welsh Rugby Union a few years back, Amanda Blom, who's Group CEO of Aviva. She's probably my role model in terms of leader in the business, and I wrote to her on LinkedIn and told her that once, and it probably came across as really creepy and weird. some random bloke writes to. So Amanda's amazing, but I think in terms of somebody who I do know and who has inspired me is Steve Hughes, who's the CEO of Coventry Building Society and Co-op Bank now. Steve's a really inspirational leader, Swansea boy through and through, wears his heart on his sleeve. And for me, has shown that you don't have to be a certain way to be really successful. He's actually, got a really big job. He's pulled off one of the biggest financial transactions by buying Co-op Bank, and is the most down-to-earth and humble leader that you'll ever meet. So it'd be great if you could get Steve on and hear his story.
Absolutely.
Great. The introduction will be very welcomed. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching and listening this edition of Leadership Actually. As ever, comment, like, subscribe. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.